I'm Dr. Darin Detwiler, and I'm here with Amy Philpott. Thank you for joining us. And what are we going to be talking about in this segment?
Darin, in this segment, I'm going to talk about how the food supply chain can prepare for a recall. And we prepare for a recall because, as you know now, we have to. Most companies have to under FSMA and the regulation under the Food Safety Modernization Act, but also because it's a good idea. And in the end, it helps protect public health. It helps protect the company from unnecessary liability and can also protect reputation and even the financial health of a company. So it just makes sense no matter the size or where the company is in the supply chain. It makes sense to be prepared. There's no such thing as zero risk. So even though I fully advocate for companies putting the bulk of their attention into prevention, there is no such thing as zero risk, so we have to be prepared. So have a plan. We've said this. Have a plan. This will guide your company's response. It doesn't have to be a complicated one. I've written plans that were 5 pages long and plans that were 50 pages long, just depending on the company's preference and the complexity of their business and where they are in the supply chain. It doesn't have to be complicated. It identifies who will be responsible for doing what before, during, and after a recall, and then also includes some of the very important communication templates that you'll absolutely need in a Class 1 recall and may need in a Class 2. It also clearly, or it should anyhow, also clearly identify your trace forward and trace back processes. So you want to make sure that you have a very clear process of tracing the product forward through the supply chain. So if we're looking at this particular diagram here, we go from raw materials to, and let's say a supplier, an intermediary, to the manufacturing company or a processing company who then distributes it. And that may go to a retailer or a food service outlet, and then finally to the consumer. This is a very simplified supply chain, but you get the idea. So let's say the problem happens at the the food manufacturing level. The trace forward goes to the right toward the consumer. Okay. The trace back goes backwards to the raw supplier. Now, the recalling company has to do both, but the most urgent part of this is the trace forward, because we want to get the notice to the consumer as fast as we can. We want to get any product that could be a potential threat out of the consumer's hand as quickly as possible. So we focus on a trace forward first. And then afterwards, when we're trying to find out what happened, what went wrong, we look at our own facility as well as the trace back. Darin, you mentioned a mock recall. I highly recommend that companies go through a mock recall. Mock recalls tend to focus on that traceability element. It'll test both the trace forward and the trace back. And I'd say more recently, several years or so, a mock recall has come to include other things such as checking a box. Do we have a customer notification template? Do we have a press release template? That sort of thing, which is very good to keep track of whether you have those or not. Okay. That's a mock recall. I personally want to distinguish that from a recall simulation. So a recall simulation is where you actually simulate a recall. So for example, in the ones that I do with food companies, We have mock customers that call and ask questions that I know have been asked in real recalls. We have mock social media inquiries. We have mock reporters calling. We have mock consumers that call and ask questions to the company about the recall that they issued during this simulation, this simulated recall. We have people who play the roles of the agency representatives, providing information that they would typically get, but also answering questions that the agency may answer. So it is a kind of soup to nuts simulation versus the mock recall focuses primarily on traceability with those check marks to make sure you have other sorts of elements in your recall plan. Both, I think, are extremely important. I would recommend starting with the mock recall, and then once you feel comfortable with that piece of the puzzle, moving to training and then a simulation.
There's something I've been talking about with I'm sorry.
Okay.
Something I've been talking about with mock recalls and simulations is that the difference between effective or ineffective ones is often the idea of doing a mock or simulated recall that involves elements that are convenient, right? You're going to do it when everyone's there, in the middle of the day on a Wednesday, and you're only going to do it for a small amount of time, and you're kind of escaping the reality of, yeah, this is never going to happen when it's convenient. This is never going to happen when all things align, kind of a thing. You need to put into it a scenario. And when I was in the military, when I was on a submarine, we would always run drills that were anything but convenient. We would have, cascading event. This happened, and then this happened, and then this piece of equipment was missing, and then this key person who's always there wasn't there, or whatever it was, to make it such that it was anything but convenient. Because if you don't practice the way you're going to do it for real, then when you are truly executing a recall, you don't know what you're truly doing.
Yeah, and I think it gets to the goal of the exercise, right? So, for example, with recall simulations, I often start with the first simulation with the goal of educating. And when the goal is to educate or to teach, you need everyone there. If the goal is to test, then that's when you want it to be unannounced, right? Now, having said that, have still been times where we've said, okay, look, this is the only time that 90% of the people are available. The other 10% will just have to fill in with our alternates, right? So you should always have alternates to everyone on your recall team. I'm running a simulation 2 weeks from now where we are going to test the all of the alternates. So we're going to do it at a time when all of the main players on the recall team are going to be inconveniently unavailable, and the alternates will have to run the drill. So you're right. Ultimately, you want to get to the point where it's unannounced and you do what you can with what you have at the time, which is very realistic. But in the interim, when you are developing the skills and training and practicing, or training and educating, sometimes it is important to have at least most of the people there.